there is a lot of debate about such definitions, and many different people have different definitions depending on the context. I'm sure there are also many divergent views about what really is sustainability. So can I ask people around the room, what does sustainability mean to you when you hear the word? What springs to your mind immediately?
Correct.
So depending on whether, what activity you are busy with, and also what your context is, sustainability, as I've said at the beginning, can have a different, you can have a different. But when we look at sustainability of a program, now when I looked at what is the broad agreement about what sustainability is, what most of the literature says, that it is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations to create and meet their needs, or to meet their needs in at that time. And I think in terms of this program and in terms of development, that is very important. And that is also, why I think what we are doing in the ALICT program and what we have done is very important, bringing in the futures dimension. Because we have to think about how will what we are doing impact on future generations? How are our policies going to impact on those people? So there are some of the words that relate to and some of the concepts that relate to sustainability, and Olivia was spot on with resilience, Gabriel was spot on with continuity, longevity, endurance, integrity. You need to have, your program in this case needs to have integrity in order to endure. Then you need to have engagement. You need to have your stakeholders engaged in order for it to endure as well. It needs to be anticipatory. It needs to be transformative. Otherwise, it's not going to last for long. And one of the important things also for me about sustainability is capacity. We have proven that this type of capacity, leadership capacity, does work. And then, of course, the cross-sectoral and cross-country collaboration. And we heard in the testimonies this morning that that is something that will be enduring. And then, of course, to be enduring, something also has to be cost-effective. If it's too costly, if it requires too much resources, then, it cannot be sustained. It must influence agendas and change. That impact must be apparent. Bring together theory and practice, as we have done in the program, and several people have commented on that. How, as a result of taking the course, they applied there in their work, and that led to new programs, new projects, new ways of thinking. And then build leadership capacities at 3 levels. At the individual level, knowing yourself; at the institutional level, how you work, how you move forward together; and then at the national levels. And then, of course, to keep people motivated and to keep them moving forward in terms of sustaining and to keep on learning, accreditation has been an important element, first in terms of retention, sustainability in terms of keeping people on the course, having that motivation, having that incentive, and then for some also to continue into a master's degree and to keep on. Because now, when I look at the mechanisms, these are the futures of the course itself, but then when we look at the mechanisms for taking that course forward, we will be looking at the wider access model. And then the use of capacities built through the program. So, we have very successfully used the capacities of our own alumni.
In relation to the network. So this is the network that a few of the colleagues have been referring to, the one that needs to practice, then sentiment, and that also has said a few things about the network. It is developed by GESCI within the framework of the ALICT LATIC program funded by MFA and Sweden. It is a community of practice. It brings together mid to senior public officials, developing partner specialists, experts and other stakeholders working in the knowledge society-related sector. We have referred to these sectors since this morning: education, STI, and ICT. Now, what is the timeline? We have adopted a phased approach to developing this network. This is where we are now, year 0, the preparation and the launch. We are moving into phase 1, which will last from 1 to 3 years, incubation and growth, until going into phase 2, 4 to 6 years. That's consolidation and sustainability of the network. This document contains all the required details about the network, the background, what it wants to achieve, the administrative organization, and you will see that in terms of administrative hosting, for the 6 years, the network will be hosted by GESCI. After having developed the initial platform in May 2016, I think Roger this morning showed us a photo from the official launch. Actually, the launch took place during the second African Ministerial Forum on ICT Integration, Education and Training, which was hosted by the Ministry of Education of Côte d'Ivoire in Abidjan. And this is the photo. We have some, I think the majority of these are here.
Yeah.
Only one is missing here. Starting March 2017, we have identified critical themes and issues. And through, of course, the procurement process, we have contracted experts who have written blogs that have been published. And this is a cross-posting between AKE program, another program funded by MFA and hosted by GESCI. So this is the cross-posting between AKE and the Leadership Network, because the theme of youth, skilling and entrepreneurship is also of interest to the Leadership Network. Another blog is about teaching science as a way of thinking. What else has been done within the framework of this Leadership Network is the meeting that we're having today. The African Leadership for Knowledge Society Forum. Now, in terms of way forward, I have mentioned earlier this detailed report. This section of the detailed report contains a 6-year plan, which is costed with a budget. This report will make available so you can go into the details if you want to. However, what we will need to do within the very short term is to continue bringing the ALICT alumni. We have now brought in 50% of these, so we continue to bring the remaining, the difference between the 250 who have already joined and the 500 who graduate from the course. To influence policy agenda. So this meeting, which is being actually organized by GESCI as the lead of the African Union Commission ICT and Education Cluster in partnership with the Millennium Education Foundation. There's a meeting in New York on September 29 on ICT and Education initiatives, expectations and way forward to achieve the SDGs. Key specialists will be there. We have the newly appointed Commissioner of Human Resource and Science and Technology. She will be there, one of the panelists. Dr. Beatrice Njenga, the head of the Education Division, will also be there. Jerome will be moderating that session. And one of the keynote is the CEO of GPE. Another forum where we want the Leadership Network to get involved is the African Forum on Youth Skills and Enterprise. It will be hosted by ICESCO, here Aziz represents ICESCO, and it is organized by GESCI, ICESCO, the African Union, ADEA, UNICEF, and one of our private sector partners, JPIK. So this is what will be done over the next 6 months. More details will be available on this actually 45-page document, and will be willing to share it with for comment and feedback. I hope I stayed within the 10 minutes.
Before I can speak on the partnership, maybe it's a good idea to tell you a bit about our involvement with GESCI prior to that partnership. So I was involved since 2011 with GESCI in the country report. Jubo was there in 2011 when we conducted all these interviews together. And again, then we joined as participants in the talks. I remember at that time a request was sent to the Vice Chancellor, the then Vice Chancellor, who sent it to all the departments. And then a team of about 5 to 7 persons from the University of Mauritius joined that course. And we followed the traditional route of many of you here who became tutors. And then we got involved in the revamping of the program and so on. So once we have completed that DCU qualification, all of us were looking towards this master's with DCU, which was, however, way too expensive for us to afford. The second aspect is my personal belief has always been that the problems that classic universities are facing is because our education models are obsolete. So as long as we do not review and revise that education model, which is teaching-centered, which is still centered on the importance of the content. You see, we are still doing face-to-face classes, focusing on a lecture which is based on content, which is available everywhere. And we are not focusing on the development of competencies and other type of skills for our students. So my personal vision for the university, and I hope as Pro-Vice Chancellor now I will get the chance to make it happen, that the university needs to reinvent itself and relook at its role, right? So what I've jotted down here is in terms of whether we have to focus on educational practices, being facilitators, and accreditation bodies. For example, an institution like GESCI has mounted such a brilliant program. Okay, we are not saying this because we have accredited or whatever the program. Its testimony is here. So why should we, let's say in a university, because we have academics with PhDs, reinvent the wheel? We can take this program, accredit it, and those who deliver that program could be the experts who are not necessarily based at the university. We can no longer afford to say that we do not have expertise in this area, because the expertise is right there throughout the world in this globalized, in the current 21st century. What is the real power or the real relevance of universities? It's their awarding powers, which is a legal provision, right? So awarding powers, for example, in Mauritius, it's by law. So you have an awarding power, which is kind of our nuclear weapons. Because without an award from a university, it's the common practice that no qualification has a value. So this is the value add. Irrespective of what you can learn from that program, if you do not have that piece of paper which says DCU, graduate diploma, or University of Mauritius, sometimes we just feel it's useless. Right? So you remember that in the first batch, how many of us were about to drop? I was myself thinking at one point in time that my professional commitments wouldn't allow me to continue that course. But when it was announced that DCU has accredited the course, so everyone just doubled the effort in order to meet that qualification or that, to achieve that outcome. So universities, if we start rethinking our role in the context of economic problems, reduced cuts and funding, we work with industry. Industry can give us the experts, the content, what we can give in return, our seal. but of course, we have to be careful. This is where quality assurance comes in. Universities are recognized for their quality assurance mechanisms. When we say we cannot recognize a program, we cannot recognize a university, what is the main argument? It's the inability for us to certify on quality. So if universities become the accrediting bodies, become quality assurance providers of security and the processors, things like this can work, because then we trust that partner. When they are delivering, we can accredit. This is the kind of this mechanism, the coherence or cohesion that should exist. We just won't accredit anyone, but this type of thing. So we can close our eyes. We know that GESCI has delivered a course. This should be our value. And universities can use their power to accredit, to award certificates. And of course, we can have academics also intervening, and that joint collaboration will sharing of knowledge will just improve the process. This is where the leadership skills or foresight that we've learned here helped myself and Roshan in that process. Because we have a very cumbersome process to approve those kinds of partnerships. First of all, we need to get it cleared by our legal advisor, the Director of Quality Assurance. Then we have to approve it in our academic board at the level of the center. Then it goes to a teaching and research committee, and then to the Senate. Finally, to the council. And at all these levels, you have different persons in those committees. And you get queries at each level that sometimes knocks you down. But we are pleased that we have managed to graduate 37, I think, the first batch. And then we have about 7 or 8 who are continuing, some latecomers. We plan to launch another batch, hopefully in January for October. And maybe this is where direct leadership network could help us in terms of marketing to get more students. And we also look forward to roll out, to be part of that group that would be rolling out the wide access model of the new leadership, the revamped, I would say, leadership program. And as per Vice Chancellor, I would also be happy to be, let's say, the first university direct to pilot the first 2 years. Maybe we'll have to compete with others, but so that's a bit our experience and our, I would say, our journey at the university through this. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
So that first one is, we would say, if you want to help people to survive in the future, and that includes the people in this room, what we all have to learn is to be value chain creators. Since the Second World War, we've had a dramatic hyper-specialization. We've all become better and better at less and less. That's not wrong. It's fantastic for the advancement of knowledge. It's just that the customer doesn't care. The customer wants the whole thing. So we need to be able to navigate this value chain from imagination, of what could be, anticipating what might be coming based on that imagination, creating something that could respond to that anticipation, innovating something, that means actually producing it and taking it to market, and then being agile when the customer says they want something else. Very much as we're in fact demonstrating right here. Let me show you number 2. What we call purpose-driven curiosity and lifelong learning. We all understand the idea of lifelong learning. I spoke about curiosity before, so I won't speak about this too much. But you know, I've already argued about why curiosity is important, and it has to be purposeful because that gives us some sense of direction. Then 3, what I called alternative non-Meccano VUCA embracing cognitive processing. What I mean by that is, you know, analytical thinking has been dominant for centuries in the academic and the industrial world, specifically driven after the Industrial Revolution. And we've heard now from Patti and from others the importance of intellectual competencies such as systems thinking, creative thinking, also adaptive computational thinking, contextual intelligence, the ability to respond at a very, very short notice, what I've called JIT presentation, just-in-time presentation. taken from operations management, and this ability to be a so-called deep generalist. So it's an interesting paradox, isn't it? A deep generalist. You want to be really deep on something, but you want to be able to navigate the world around that. Otherwise, if you step out of the accounting office, you're lost. If you step out of the HR office, you're lost. So how do we develop that kind of deep generalism? And one of the principles there is transdisciplinarity. Patti also spoke about this. The next one there is what we're calling competitive enterprise. And as much as the world, with all the help of Oprah, is moving towards a kind of collaborative, let's hug each other, let's agree, let's work together, that's fantastic. But listen, colleagues, even if everybody starts to work together, tomorrow morning there'll be a new guy who isn't in yet, who's just created something. So competition is not going to go away. So to develop a competitive spirit and a competitive mindset, not because you want to kill the other person, only because you want to survive, and yes, once again, this comes from my deep failings as a capitalist with no capital, but the competitive ability is important, even in education. Governments don't even think about the idea of competition because they think they don't have competition. But if you just think about foreign direct investment, that's the first place that governments compete with each other, even when governments collaborate. The fifth one there is what I've called experience transcendence. It's a little bit of a philosophical idea. Basically, it says, get over yourself. Let me give you a practical example here. My son and my father and I, a few weeks ago, are watching rugby. And as you know, rugby is one of the many religions in South Africa. We're watching rugby, and in the middle of the game, one of the Springbok rugby players drops the rugby ball. And my son, with all the experience of his full 9 years, shouts out, "I've never seen anything like this in my life!" And it made me think about this idea of how old do you need to be before you can say that? And actually, that comes from a time when we all had more or less the same experience, we all lived in more or less the same village, and the oldest person had the most experience because there was a linear progression of experience. You now know that you go to the village where you come from and you'll have more experience than most people there. Particularly more than those over the age of 60. Yes, we theorize they have wisdom. I haven't seen the publications on that wisdom, but maybe it's true. But we have to get over the idea, and that includes things like role modeling for age appropriateness. It's a psychological competence for the future, because you have parents and grandparents who retired, for example, at a certain age, or who worked at a certain level of intensity at a certain age, or who behaved in a certain way at a certain age. And of course, we know that that's changing absolutely dramatically. The next one is a very difficult intellectual competence, and that's discernment. I spoke a little bit about the noise to signal ratio this morning, but it's also about the idea of trend transcendence, new media literacy, tacit knowledge acquisition. One example here is that we really need to learn to become digital dietitians. If you have children who live on the internet like mine, then you realize that some digital consumption is extremely helpful and some can be extremely damaging. The fact that some is damaging doesn't mean you shouldn't go on the internet, because you'll die if you don't do that. So developing digital dietitian skills is an example of discernment. Then I think autodidactics is going to be a growing skill in the future. In other words, learn to teach yourself, or learn to learn from yourself by yourself. Yeah? Because for one thing, you need to learn things that your teachers, your professors, you've heard Professor Santelli saying we need to think completely differently about how universities work. The knowledge can be accessed in many different ways. So can we develop this? Think about the implications here, colleagues. So you have, on a Thursday afternoon, at 2 o'clock, you have a double in imagination. The next morning, you have a double in curiosity. And then that afternoon you have a lab on autodidactics. That's what we think the curriculum of the future could look like. Because the knowledge can be acquired almost anywhere. Okay. I'm going to assume silence is consent, as politicians do. Social intelligence, of course, is not going to go away. And most notably here, we think that empathetic collaboration and design is going to have to be something that you actively learn. In other words, the argument here is, if you ask most people, what did you learn at university, for example, in addition to a few formulas that you may have forgotten? Most people would say, I learned to think, solve problems, work with others. Well, why don't we just have a module on that? If that's what you learn, why should you do a course for 3 years and then spend another 10 years before you figure out that's what you've learned? Why not just learn that? Then we think that one of the other skills is going to be what we call evolutionary ecology. This is the idea that you want to think about how this ecology in which you work, whether that's at a personal level, an organizational level, a conceptual level, an institutional level, how is that ecology likely to evolve? And how do you see your own place as an individual, as an institution, as a concept developer within that ecology? And then finally, something on future funding. Something not enough of us have learnt at university. Certainly I didn't learn this at university, if I learnt anything at university. It was Oscar Wilde who said, fortunately my education has had no impact on me whatsoever. In other words, Oscar Wilde was an autodidact. You realize that he essentially taught himself. What do I mean by future funding? This is not just the kind of retirement funding skills and saving skills which we all know, but perhaps a few silly ones like failure funding. So if you haven't failed significantly in the last 3 years, I would argue you're not trying hard enough. You're just playing it safe. You're living in the spreadsheet, hoping for retirement. But I'm sure that's not true of anyone here. Life stage, transition educational funding. We've heard some great examples of people who've embraced, for example, the GESCI program. And that has transitioned them into a different place in their career and in their lives. Of course, that takes a lot of money. What about geographic relocation funding? As needs, we know the world's globalizing, so as the needs for your skills are shifting around the globe, it may be the case that you need to move around where that need is, rather than complaining about the lack of opportunity in your own country. Then we would say you need an experimentation and rapid prototyping fund for all your ideas. You know that long list of ideas you have? 11 ideas. Yeah. Something to bring that to life. Yeah? And then we'd say that you probably need a reflection fund. The gap year is the most obvious example of this. But I've got a 45-year-old friend who's just decided she's taking next year off. She's going to think about stuff. I know that's a very luxurious thing to say, particularly in the context of Africa. But if you understand that she's going to live for at least another 45 years, maybe it's not such a bad idea. A few other examples, like a tech upgrade fund. You already notice you need that. Or, like in my case, you work for academia, you can't afford it, you have a tech upgrade fund for your children. You upgrade their technology, and you still walk around with your BlackBerry, right? But an interesting example for the future of a tech upgrade is you need to have a fund to upgrade your implants. That money's going to come from somewhere. You may not have many of them at the moment. I don't know. Of course, we all know crowdfunding is happening, so what are the skills around managing crowd equity? And then we do some interesting work with the future of insurance. You may need some skills on unique exposure insurance, because insurance companies are going to get better and better, more and more clever at denying your claims because you have a unique life which almost no one else has, and you haven't explained that sufficiently to the insurance company. Colleagues, just a few ideas of what we think might be the kind of competencies that people of the future may need, and that they may have to learn explicitly because they just won't have the time to learn it slowly like we did. Thank you very much.